Amazon Games' New World was one of the most anticipated MMORPGs in recent history, promising players a unique blend of survival mechanics, action-packed combat, and an immersive player-driven economy. When it was first announced, the buzz around the game was nothing short of electric. Many believed it had the potential to be the next major player in the MMORPG genre, standing toe-to-toe with industry giants like World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, and the Elder Scrolls Online. But despite a strong launch and initial player engagement, New World quickly ran into trouble. Within months, the game went from being hailed as a groundbreaking MMORPG to a title that was losing players at an alarming rate. Server issues, gameplay missteps, and an overall lack of polish led to what many would consider a fall from grace. Yet with a major overhaul and a re-release on the horizon dubbed New World Aeternum, many players and fans are beginning to wonder, can the game make a comeback? In this video, we'll take an in-depth look at the rise, fall, and future of New World. We'll explore how Amazon Games' first MMORPG rose to prominence, the factors that led to its decline, and whether New World Aeternum can be the fresh start the game needs to succeed in the cutthroat MMORPG landscape. When New World was first announced in 2016, it was seen as Amazon Games' big entry into the gaming industry. This was no small endeavor. The company was investing heavily in developing a AAA MMORPG, a genre that requires enormous resources both in terms of development and post-launch support. Despite Amazon's relative inexperience in game development at the time, excitement for the game grew as it was pitched as a survival-style MMORPG, set in the mysterious island of Aeternum, a land shrouded in mystery and danger. One of the game's key selling points was its massive dynamic world. Players would be able to explore vast forests, conquer strongholds, and fight for territory in epic faction-based battles. The setting, inspired by a mix of 17th century colonization themes, supernatural mythology, and dark fantasy, was fresh and different from the traditional high fantasy worlds often seen in MMORPGs. Players were drawn to the idea of New World's unique combat system, which deviated from the tab targeting mechanics typical of most MMOs. Instead, the game featured an action-oriented combat system that required players to aim, dodge, and time their attacks precisely. This, combined with the promise of large-scale PvP wars, a rich crafting system, and player-driven economy, created a sense of anticipation that was hard to ignore. In mid-2021, New World's open beta sent waves of excitement throughout the gaming community. The game saw over 1 million players eager to test out the systems that Amazon Games had spent years developing. Feedback from the beta was overwhelmingly positive. Streamers and YouTubers alike showcased the game's beautiful environments, its immersive and atmospheric sound design, and its exciting combat system. One of the standout features during this period was the game's faction system, which allowed players to join one of 3 factions: the Marauders, the Syndicate, or the Covenant.
That one's against yellow. You can have fun against them. Alright, push up, push up, push up.
Underestimate them. They have green in there a lot too.
Give me eyes on where you guys see their armies.
Oh,
They did not go B.
They're going A.
Pushing
A.
A? Alright, everyone. Get to A, everyone.
Yes.
Get to A. Get to A, get to the point. Oh. Oh. Bruisers pull back. Bruisers pull back. Go straight for their back line. It was an awful push. It was an awful push on their end.
They're siege.
Front line, clear siege. Anyone in the back line, focus on clearing out this back line. Get Sin in the back.
Signal's in our backline, really exposed.
All tanks stay on point. Everyone else, pull back and focus on this flank thing they got going on. Not even flank, they're just straight dive in the back line.
We cleared almost all of their siege on A, and we're holding strong here with Fallen.
Good. Make sure you guys are buying Inferno traps too.
These factions could engage in massive territorial wars, where hundreds of players would fight to control key regions of the map. The prospect of engaging in these large-scale battles alongside the deep crafting and gathering systems made the game feel like it was offering something different from its competitors. Visually, New World was a masterpiece. Powered by the Lumberyard engine, the game boasted highly detailed environments, from sprawling forests to ancient ruins and stunning mountain vistas. The lightning, weather effects, and overall aesthetic combined to create a world that players wanted to spend hours exploring. It wasn't just the casual players who were excited. Hardcore MMORPG enthusiasts also saw potential in New World. The game seemed to offer the sandbox elements that players of games like EVE Online loved, combined with the structured PvE and PvP systems of more traditional MMORPGs. As the release date of September 2021 drew closer, the hype around the game continued to build. With Amazon's vast resources backing the project, expectations were sky high. However, when New World officially launched on September 28, 2021, the game's meteoric rise quickly began to falter. The cracks that had been overlooked during the beta test started to become more apparent, and what was supposed to be Amazon Games' crowning achievement turned into a cautionary tale about the dangers of launching an MMO before it's ready. The game initially saw a massive influx of players, with over 900,000 concurrent players on Steam during launch week. This created its first major problem: server overloads. Many players experienced long queue times, with some waiting hours just to log in. Amazon Games scrambled to address the server issues by adding new servers and increasing capacity, but the damage had already been done. Players who were excited to jump into the game found themselves frustrated and discouraged before they even set foot on Eternum's shores. But the server issues were just the beginning. As players started to progress through the game, several deeper problems began to emerge. One of the biggest issues that plagued New World early on was its lack of meaningful endgame content. Many players hit the level cap relatively quickly, only to find that there was little to do once they reached the endgame. While leveling and exploring Eternum had been engaging for a time, the game's endgame loop felt shallow and repetitive. Players were left to grind the same handful of dungeons and world bosses over and over, with little variation or challenge. This lack of compelling endgame content led to a sharp decline in player engagement. MMORPGs thrive on providing players with challenging and rewarding activities at max level, and New World simply didn't have enough to keep its player base invested. Without meaningful progression systems or a wide variety of endgame activities, players started to lose interest. The game's player-driven economy, which was supposed to be one of its standout features, quickly spiraled out of control. A series of gold duplication glitches and other exploits led to massive inflation and economic instability. Resources that were meant to be scarce became abundant due to duplication glitches, and this broke the economy in ways that were hard to fix. Amazon Games tried to address these issues by shutting down the game's trading system temporarily to fix the exploits, but by then, the damage had already been done. The market was flooded with duplicated resources, and players who had amassed large fortunes through legitimate means saw their hard-earned wealth devalued overnight. This economic instability frustrated many players and drove them away from the game. The large-scale faction wars that had been one of New World's major selling points were also riddled with problems. The faction system, while interesting in concept, was hampered by balance issues and technical glitches. Wars often became unplayable due to server lag, and certain factions or player groups were able to exploit the game's mechanics to dominate others unfairly. In addition to the technical issues, there were also significant balance problems with the game's combat system. Some abilities and weapons were grossly overpowered, leading to frustrating experiences for players on the receiving end. The PvP system, which was supposed to be the game's defining feature, instead became a source of frustration for everyone. In their attempt to fix the game's many problems, Amazon Games pushed out frequent patches and updates. However, many of these patches felt like overcorrections. Players who had invested time and effort into building their characters around certain abilities or weapons often found their builds rendered useless after a single patch. The constant nerfs and changes created an unstable meta, where players couldn't rely on their preferred playstyles for long before something changed drastically. This created a sense of inconsistency and frustration among the entire player base. Players want to feel like their time and effort are rewarded in an MMORPG. but with the constant balance changes and overcorrections, many felt like they were wasting their time. By the end of 2021, New World had lost the majority of its player base. From a peak of over 900,000 concurrent players, the game's population had plummeted to less than 100,000 within just a few months. The rapid decline in player numbers was alarming, and it seemed like New World was on a path to becoming another failed MMORPG in a long line of games that had promised much but delivered little. Following the initial wave of player departures, Amazon Games began to implement a series of updates and improvements in an attempt to win back their lost audience. New expeditions, or dungeons, were introduced, bugs were fixed, and the game's PvP and crafting systems received much-needed updates. The developers worked hard to address the core issues that had plagued the game since launch, but for many players, the damage was just already done. One of the biggest challenges that New World faced in its post-launch period was the loss of player trust. MMORPGs are unique in that they require a strong and dedicated community to thrive, and once a game loses its community's trust, it's incredibly difficult to regain. Players had been burned by the game's launch issues, and convincing them to return was no easy task. While Amazon Games did manage to stabilize the game somewhat, it was clear that New World was no longer the success story that many had hoped it would be. The game's player base continued to dwindle, and it became increasingly difficult to find active players in certain regions. By the start of 2022, New World was considered by many to be a failed project, another ambitious MMORPG that had fallen short of its potential. However, despite its rocky start, New World may not be down for the count just yet. In 2024, Amazon Games announced New World Aeternum, a re-release of the game that promises to address many of the core issues that led to its initial downfall. But can this new version of the game bring back the player base and restore New World to its former glory? New World Aeternum is being marketed as a major overhaul of the base game, with a focus on delivering the content and quality of life improvements that players had been asking for since launch. While the exact details of the re-release are still being finalized, several key features have been highlighted as potential game changers for New World. One of the main areas of focus in Aeternum is the combat system. Amazon Games has acknowledged that the original combat mechanics, while innovative, were flawed in execution. The re-release aims to make combat feel more fluid, balanced, and strategic. The changes will address the issues of overpowered abilities, lag in PvP battles, and overall balance problems that plagued the game's initial launch. By making combat more engaging and rewarding, Amazon hopes to entice players back into the game's PvP systems, which were a major draw for many players during the game's early days. Perhaps the most significant addition in Aeternum is the introduction of new and expanded endgame content. Amazon Games has learned from the mistakes of the original launch and is focusing heavily on providing players with meaningful activities to engage in once they reach max level. This includes the introduction of new expeditions, world events, and faction wars that are designed to be more dynamic and challenging. The re-release will also introduce new progression systems, allowing players to continue developing their characters even after hitting the level cap. Another major area of improvement in Aeternum is the game's crafting and economy systems. The player-driven economy, which was originally broken by exploits and glitches, has been overhauled to provide a more stable and rewarding experience. Amazon Games has promised better safeguards against exploits, as well as a more balanced resource system that will make crafting feel more rewarding and worthwhile. One of the most promising aspects of the game is that the developers seem to have genuinely listened to the player base. Many of the changes and improvements that are being implemented in the re-release have been directly influenced by player feedback. This shows a more transparent and engaged approach from Amazon Games, which could go a long way in rebuilding trust with their community. So we've highlighted both the potential and pitfalls of launching an ambitious MMORPG in today's gaming landscape. While the game initially showed great promise, a series of missteps led to its rapid decline. However, with the upcoming re-release of New World Aeternum, there is hope that Amazon Games can turn things around. The big question now is, will Aeternum be enough to bring players back who left? And can it attract a new generation of gamers looking for a fresh MMORPG experience? I guess only time will tell. But if Amazon Games has truly learned from their past mistakes, New World may yet have a second chance at greatness.